It's a small group. Perfect. But we will go on and get started to honor your time. We're a small but mighty group. And no problem, Nick. Thank you for the heads up. But please burn up the chat if you're with your feedback. So glad you could be with us, and definitely we have some great work to do. So I'm going to turn it over to Jan to get us started, and we'll keep rolling.
Hey, well, thank you all so much again for spending the time with us today. We had some great discussion at our July work group meeting, and we'll talk a little bit about some highlights from that. Just a reminder, we do want to elevate the work. So those of you that are active on social media, just always remind you to check out the work from the CPE and the Commonwealth Education Continuum, and then share insights and on your own social media platforms. Today, we're going to spend some time discussing, maybe not creating so much as just looking around recommendations around what we would like to use around the 9th grade on track definition. We talked a lot last month about the need for understanding and communication of best practices and indicators. So we're going to spend some time going over that and having some discussion around that today. So just to kind of jump right in, I always like to just kind of remind us of our purpose, and we really are building off the CEC's efforts to develop those actionable recommendations to identify a set of recommendations to better prepare students to support in that transition to post-secondary. And really our purpose is to tackle those key issues around 9th grade on track. And so really want to let our work be guided by some of the data, the input from our focus groups and the CEC members. Let's see about my net. Whoops. So really, when we think about our discussion last month, I think most of you were here. Some of you may not have been able to make it or stay the whole meeting. But as we looked at the data from our stakeholder interviews and focus groups, and we did provide a link to that. We'll do that in the chat, but also in your member folder. And I think we sent it out in the email, but really had some great discussions. And some of the key findings from the ESG presentation were these 5 themes, and data was probably the one that was most mentioned in the stakeholder interviews. A lot of the educators and administrators really acknowledged the importance of having a data system and a strategy to really capture information that would identify students who might need additional support and to be able to make those changes that, to improve the student success. Early warning systems were probably mentioned as a tool most frequently used to identify students who might be at risk, and just really also to use to just gauge the impact of how all students were doing at 9th grade. Academic expectations, that was really cited as a transition challenge. Most of the students mentioned they had a challenge of finding their way around in the new building, knowing the supports available to them, adjusting to the new schedules. And parents also wanted to understand the changes that their students were having from middle to high school, and appreciated any opportunities to meet with teachers in person and to really be able to support their students in their transition. We also know that next theme of social and mental health, pretty huge for all students, but it was a common theme brought up among the educators and parents alike. We know findings really do indicate that adolescents tend to generally struggle with anxiety and depression, and benefit from having those adults to talk to about mental health. The family engagement piece came up also in the stakeholder interviews. Parents did feel responsible for monitoring their students' progress, but they noticed that they couldn't do it without the support of and those communications from the school. And they said they rely on teachers, on counselors, on coaches to keep them informed. And that was a huge piece of our discussion about communication and alternate ways to communicate. And then, of course, post-secondary goals, and stakeholders across the board mentioned the importance of connecting that work that the students are going to be doing in 9th grade with their long-term goals. And district highlighted pathways and dual credit, dual enrollments as tools they use to help build that intrinsic motivation. The students mentioned that individual learning plan, not necessarily the most helpful tool, really because they're not seeing it being an actionable tool. It wasn't being acted upon. So then we talked about some of the bright spots, and I think that was just really illuminating and just good to hear some of the things that were happening around supports. And so we heard about freshman academy models. We heard about a district that was implementing a social emotional curriculum, specifically starting with ninth graders as they rolled that out. Ninth grade on track teams, those teams that would meet monthly and really look at the supports needed and maybe interventions that could be useful or supports to their students. And then one principal noted the success they were having with a freshman seminar course. So really these bright spots, the data that we looked at from those surveys really kind of helped us, kind of guided our discussion around, what do we really mean when we say students are on track at ninth grade? And that was a challenge. What indicators do we want to recommend or elevate in Kentucky? We really generated a lot of discussion around, those different measures or indicators that could be used, wondering what might be some effective evidence-based practices to also elevate and use in our recommendation. A huge discussion was around communication, and maybe we have some of these things out there, but how are they being communicated, and how might they be communicated more effectively? So we sort of left that discussion with next steps as to review some resources around ninth grade on track, indicators, best practices. We shared some information with you in your resources in your folder. A couple of resources went out in the email, but our folks from ESG really helped us and presented some information that we'll go over with you today. But before I move on, just wanted to stop for just a second. Were there any thoughts, feedback, questions around some of the data that we looked at last month? Okay. Well, like I said, we do have some information to share with you around evidence-based practice and indicators. And since we're really going to use that to guide our discussion, we have provided you with a note catcher to just kind of capture your thoughts. There's kind of a lot of information that we're going to go through, and want to give you a time to just make sure that you're jotting down the things you want to refer back to when we come back to that whole group discussion. So we've dropped that link for you for that document in the chat. Give you just a minute to open that, get that in front of you, or whatever paper pencil method you prefer to use to capture the information that we're going to go through now. And then I will turn it over to Amanda to kind of go through those next slides with us.
Okay, so everyone should be able to see in the chat the link, just so you're able to capture some ideas. So as Jan said before, there are lots of conversations when I went back to review, because I wasn't able to join you last month, just the conversation about what do we mean, and we've really been thinking around that, and what is it the continuum can do, because we can't force people to do certain practices, but we can certainly elevate strategies, evidence-based practices, and bring to you some things that are going on in other states. This is not novel, and if you've been around for a while, you will know that we've had the early warning system for a while. We've had MTSS, we've had RTI, we've had lots of things, but I don't know that we've ever put a laser light focus in on it before. So ESG wasn't able to be here today, so I'm delivering their summary of information. So I'm not as eloquent as Brianna or Lauren, but I'm really excited to share some of these. So you're gonna see on the first screen, the best practices. So there are two ways to think about best practices to support ninth grade on track: strategies districts can employ and actions that states can take. So you can take a minute to kind of read through these. And I think what's almost a little bit affirming is the bright spots that Jan just mentioned. A lot of these are captured in there. So it's not that they are brand new and Kentucky's never heard of them, but sometimes when we have all the things to do, we lose sight of some really key pieces, especially when students move in out of the middle school and into high school. We don't talk about that nearly as much as we talk about high school seniors making that transition to post-secondary decisions, whatever that may be. So we're going to spend some time today just going through these strategies in more detail. But first, we wanted to start off with what the evidence says about best on-track indicators. So it's the first thing we're going to look at is indicators. So I'll give you a minute to take a look at this slide. A lot of the research on ninth grade on track has come out of Chicago Public Schools and the University of Chicago's To and Through project and the New York for College Success. And at the end of this, when we send this PowerPoint, all the links are there. And a lot of these things were also included in your resources that Jan and Destiny had for you earlier in your folder from the previous meeting. So Chicago defines on track as having earned at least 5 credits and no more than 1 semester failed in a core course. Research has shown that on track is more predictive of a student's odds of graduating high school than all other factors combined, including gender, race, socioeconomic status, 8th grade test scores, mobility, and overage of for grade. This tells us that credits earned and grades are effective predictors of high school graduation. I know there's tons of conversation around grades, and you're going to hear a lot of conversation about GPA, and it's always a rich discussion on, well, that's very subjective. People give grades and elevate them, especially in Kentucky for keys. There's lots of factors, but overall it's pretty consistent. We've seen research even in the state of GPA being a good indicator. Jan, if you'll go to the next one. Additionally, new research out of Chicago suggests that failure in any course, not only core courses, should be monitored. And a lot of conversations around failure of coursework, or even when you talk about GPA, is really just the grit, sticking with it. Maybe there needs to be true intervention with whatever the difficulty may be of completing the work and meeting expectation, whatever that is that really should be monitored. So it's very telling. One of the things that we would get pushback on when we talked about GPA, even for college admission, is an indicator of readiness. Excuse me, not for admission, but for placement, is that people say, well, wonder if they took all humanities classes, or what if they took all of their favorite classes. And the research around it, when we had a couple of researchers come in, they said that they still cared enough to maintain their grade, and putting forth that effort, focus, and completion really does sometimes drive how they succeed, which was kind of interesting to me. Okay, Jan, go then. Perfect. Another one that we talk about is attendance. So there's a strong relationship between ninth grade attendance and on-time graduation. Research, this is out of Philadelphia, has shown that there is no cliff in attendance. Every day missed decreases a student's chances of graduating on time. But the good news is that even if a student misses a lot of days early in the year, strong attendance in the second half of the school year increases their chances of graduating on time. This means interventions by schools can improve attendance and therefore graduation rates. This is where a lot of times in Kentucky, I feel like we have an opportunity with our youth service centers. They do this early on with attendance, working with truant students or families, but we know attendance matters. And those of you who have been in schools or are in schools, what we used to hear is it's really hard to teach a student if they're not present. And so we just have to think through the importance of having them there, having them present. And even if they, with our new world of virtual, still engaging those students if they are virtually attending school, which is a new challenge that we have to wrap our heads around. Another indicator for research that's been identified is ninth grade GPA. We talked a little bit about it. When we look beyond the high school graduation to post-secondary attainments, a little bit what I was talking about a while ago, GPA becomes a strong predictor. In fact, freshman year GPA is nearly twice as predictive as standardized test scores of post-secondary attainment. This is in part because GPA encapsulates many of the indicators we've already discussed, like attendance, credits earned, and course grades. GPA may also capture other characteristics that are harder to measure, such as self-advocacy, grit, withedness, stick-withedness, whatever you all want to call it. If a student does not have a 3.0 or above GPA by the end of freshman year, it is difficult, though not impossible, to attain a 3.0 by graduation. This is why ESG advocates for using GPA as a primary indicator of whether a student is on track. We also want to note that flagging a student of being on track for not, off track for not having a 3.0 does not mean they are incapable of attaining a 3.0, graduating on time, or attaining a post-secondary degree. Instead, it flags the student for the school to determine what factors are contributing to the student's challenges and to intervene to get the student back on track. And so it's not a deficit of admiring the problem and setting them up to fail. Rather, it's an opportunity to identify where the need is to intervene. Which is why, if you all were ever wondering how we pulled Jan into this work, is because this is what Jan's been doing at KDE around multi-tier system of supports, especially in secondary. And that's always the toughest area. And we oftentimes don't think about interventions for older kids through these different ways, but it's absolutely essential. We can go to the next one. So the next piece is an indicator's middle grade GPA. And we don't talk enough, in my opinion, about middle school. Maybe it's because I'm a former middle school teacher. And they are some interesting characters. I wouldn't trade them for the world, though, because they are still impressionable. They are still willing to try things out, but they are very not always comfortable in their skin. So it's an opportunity to really guide and direct students early and often. So a student's performance in middle school is also a good predictor of ninth grade success. Eighth grade core GPA is the best predictor of being on track at the end of ninth grade. At the same time, students' GPAs typically fall between 8th and 9th grade, excuse me, and this drop tends to be larger for higher achieving students. So you can see that on the screen with their core GPA. When they're higher, they tend to drop a little bit. You usually have course variation in high school that may best meet the achievement level or desire of the student or what they have access to. And so it's a really interesting data slide, I feel like, on how the GPA does fluctuate. Although there is some concern about grading standards differing between schools, the research showed that the differences are generally not as great as we think, typically less than half of a GPA point. There's just a lot of information. I know we're throwing this at you, but just want your brain kind of revolving around the indicators, what sticks out to you, and what is really making sense and starting to click for Kentucky students, or maybe things you're already doing. And then the middle school or middle grade attendance for indicator research. This is the last indicator we'll talk about. But predictions can be improved by combining 8th grade GPA with attendance. Test scores and behavior records are not as predictive of high school performance. And oftentimes we hear that is the piece, especially if you've lived a behavioral issue, extreme truancy. Really, it's an opportunity for growth and identifying some strategic moves to re-engage the students and really help them set a course. It's really interesting to me, excuse me, to see that this whole chart with the percentage of students, the attendance declines dramatically from 8th to 9th grade. I just think it's an interesting chart between 8th grade and 9th grade and what can be done, and that it's not about the test scores or the behavior. So if you've had some serious behavior issues in middle school, sometimes those are my best and brightest, and you've got to figure out how to connect with them and meet them where they are, because they may be thinking way beyond you and not in that linear thinking. They may be thinking outside the box and maybe have not found their connection. And there's so much relationship piece on this and opportunity to really build some pathways and opportunities as they see that they have more freedoms and things in high school, more options. And I don't know that we talk about this enough. I'm not sure. So it's something to think about. Any initial questions or clarifications that I will do my best to answer on indicators before we move on, because I don't want to just word dump on you. Or anything that sticks out is like, haven't thought about that, or this is age old. This is nothing new. All right, let's keep going. So district strategies. Now that we reviewed the research on predictive indicators, we'll discuss strategies districts can use to improve on-track grades. And some of these are going to look very familiar to me, familiar to you. And this is what some of our schools do, but many don't. So we know that districts should definitely utilize their data to determine the state of on-track rates in the district and to monitor students in real time. And we do this with so many things, especially in the lower levels in the early grades. This is kind of how we roll. It tends to change a bit when they switch classes, go to teams, and become more content team driven. But if you look at this slide, it's really just giving you some indicators to analyze data, historical data, disaggregate the data, and regularly monitor. You can do that by race, socioeconomic status, gender, ELL status, and other characteristics. within districts to identify the equity gaps. And some of the times what we see when people talk about this to disaggregate data, they'll say, well, my district's not diverse, so I don't have this issue. We're all white or we're all poor. But if you really look at your data and even the discrepancies in attendance or the discrepancies with the GPA or a course performance, there are always some gaps somewhere. Maybe your special education population, it could be your gifted population that have gaps that need to be addressed. And so it's important that you monitor the students in their progress and what they're doing. And so there you can see the questions on the right of just questions to consider. And this is something, as you're thinking about our work group, that could even be captured in ways that we provide, not necessarily a toolkit, but resources that we could team up with KDE to share these resources with the schools. If they haven't done this or it's been a while, of just what percentage of ninth graders have been on track? You know, how are we going to make recommendations around indicators for what would be considered on track? Just to get your mind going, how did the pandemic impact the percentage of students who are on track? And we're going to see the impact of this for years, and we got to know how to navigate that. Are there disparities in the percent of students on track for certain subgroups among high schools? Which schools have the most students on track? Which ones have the smallest disparities? What are the bright spots? Are there certain classes ninth grade students tend to struggle with? So it helps to narrow down some of the strategic approaches you could make to address the challenges, maybe barriers you didn't realize that you have, or discrepancies. Go on to the next one, please. Early warning systems. I know Dee Dee Connor could probably take the mic right now and do this in her sleep, because this is not a new tool, and you'll see here in a minute we'll have one specifically for Infinite Campus. But an early warning system, if you're not familiar, is a powerful tool for districts to quickly identify students who are off track. Early warning systems use local historical student data, research-based early warning indicators, and predictive analytics to accurately identify students who are in danger of not graduating on time. Reports should be pulled on a regular basis and reviewed by a team of administrators, counselors, and teachers to assign and monitor interventions. So it's really this pretty comprehensive approach to identifying need and doing it early and often. And you can see the process. We are really fortunate, I feel like, in Kentucky. We've had this in Infinite Campus for a while. Dee Dee probably could give us the amount of time. And there's an ebb and flow with probably districts who are highly proficient and could really be the model, and others are not taking advantage of it, and it's probably mixed across the state would be my guess. And honestly, it was probably used more before COVID, and people are still trying to get on their feet. And a lot of tools that have been used and have been available for a long time have a little bit of dust on them, because it's hard to triage and do early warning systems. So we really want to get back into being proactive and thinking about this. So Infinite Campus does have an early warning system. As you can see, this is an example that assigns students a GR80 score, a prediction of their likelihood of graduating based on attendance, behavior, academics, and home and school stability. And so when we get to the point of discussion, Dee Dee, please feel free to jump in on that too, just to clarify anything. But I really do feel like this is a strong tool that Kentucky has access to. Every public school in the state has Infinite Campus, and really has an opportunity to use this tool without a huge cost. That's what I was going to ask, Lou. I think you're reading my mind. Dee Dee, is there an extra cost for the early warning system, or is that available to all districts? How does that work?
It is available to all districts at no cost. That is something actually KDE put together some money we had, I think maybe even back when you were there, Amanda.
Yeah, I couldn't remember.
It wasn't the Office of Education Technology that had the money, but there was some grant money available that we put towards and partnered with Infinite Campus on building this. Part of that agreement was we got to maintain it for all Kentucky districts without having to pay. What we've gone and done, and just recently, is we're using some of our ESSER money to do some additional work in our campus analytics suite. So Infinite Campus has agreed to open up campus analytics to all Kentucky districts. Now, right now, our biggest part of it is early warning system and data health check, and they had that already. But there are some good survey tools. There's some there are some other reporting that's available. But what we're working over for the next couple of years is that they're going to be able to see. We're going to be able to add to those analytics to where they have their own dashboard. Like a school could, like, each individual in the school based on their work, can create their own dashboard. But we'll be introducing some new tools and stuff like that. And I saw Lou's question that came up, and do parents have that? No, they do not have that in their campus portal at this point in time.
But I think and I know we'll be discussing this later as we move into back to the whole group discussion, but Dee Dee, it brought to my mind the discussion that we had in July around the communication piece. There's a lot of good tools and resources and information around how to use it and access it. And we, through our MTSS work, we really try to emphasize, school teams using that information. But I think that piece of the communication, how is it communicated? How is the message out there, and how can we get it in the hands of more people? Maybe something we want to be thinking about as we craft our recommendations.
Right. And that's a very important, because it is a matter of people using it. And we've not had the use that we'd like to see, but we do have a presentation on September the 20th. Infinite Campus, we're having them introduce campus analytics to everybody. I'll put the link to that in your chat, but you can register for it if you're interested in it. But it will go over early warning and some of the other campus analytics tools, and kind of set the stage for the fact that we're building towards even more in that suite. We're partnering again with Infinite Campus to build towards more. And so some of the value I feel like that I can take back from this group is things that maybe we can consider. And when the data team met last week talking about this same topic, one of the things, you think about early warning, it's all about predicting high school graduation. That doesn't mean they're going to go. I mean, we have a very high graduation percentage in Kentucky. If you look at our school report card, it's 90% typically, or close to it for every race ethnicity. But we don't see the value of what are the early warning system, how well does that predict? But it's got all the different pieces of the puzzle that we all keep talking about. It's got, grades, it's got attendance, it's got behavior, it's got, mobility, all that stuff built into the score. So what we're going to do is we're going to provide, and we go back to 2014 and provide a few of the early years. And I will say the grad scores keep getting better and better, because as we do the data scientist work, it's based on being predictive based on what's happened in the past. So they continue to refine and get better, but we're going to look at those old scores and see whether end of year 8th grade early warning or end of year 9th grade early warning would be a good predictor, or how that aligns to post-secondary college going, and also post-secondary college success. And it might take us a little bit more years to get to the success piece of it, to really be able to analyze how good of a predictor is for that. But for college going, I think we've got some data right now that we can really use to look at that.
And just one more thing to add, I would just say is it's also a really good way to look at the health of your system. So even though we know you can look at kids that may need something extra, it's also a good way to look at how well are we doing overall. And so I think we go back to that preventative approach that Dee Dee's talking about. It's so helpful at middle school and 9th grade to be thinking, are we preparing our students to be successful? So thinking about it as a prevention tool, as well as a tool to help us identify students who may need extra supports, kind of keeping that in mind as well.
And really want to, create some reporting that allows those students that just might drop through the cracks for a little while before somebody realizes, make those students pop to the top. So you can say, oh, wow, there's some change in the student's life that maybe can be addressed before it really gets to, a huge problem.
Absolutely. And Dee Dee, I appreciate you sharing that. I have lots of things going through my mind as we think about possible actions and way we could support you and the work that you guys are doing to improve that tool and to get the word out. So thank you for jumping in. I didn't mean to call you out and do improv there, but I really do appreciate it. Okay, Jan, if you'll go to the next one. Lots of notes on that page. 9th grade success teams. You read a little bit about this already. Here's an example. So once districts have their data, they can use success teams to frequently review the data, inventory current and available interventions, assign interventions, and continue to monitor students' progress. This is from the Network for College Success Freshman on Track Toolkit. So again, this will be in the resources to look at. I know the words are probably a 0.05 font, but it gives you an idea of the framework and what folks use to really have a team and have specific role groups of what can happen with freshman success. So supporting the transition in ninth grade, we talked a lot about, there are steps districts can take to support that transition. The first is facilitate data sharing between middle and high schools and making middle school indicator data available to ninth grade teams. Districts can also help connect middle and high school teachers to learn about at-risk students. And that is not meaning to say this was the worst kid ever in my class, but really identify strategies that have been really positive, that you figured out that have worked well in different settings. It could be academic strategies through interventions or things that have worked. There's no sense in sending a student over and teachers taking it blind to start all over. It's really important with that transition piece, that handoff, that's a positive transition experience. High school can be a really overwhelming place for students who may have any type of challenges, just for the typical student as well, whatever typical is. I don't even know if there is one anymore. I think we all have challenges. Middle schools can also help prepare students for ninth grade by beginning conversations about high school expectations early. Orientation programs can also pair eighth grade students with mentors, invite them into the high school on campus to begin to learn the layout, meet teachers and counselors, and learn about the school's resources. I will tell you what stuck out on our stakeholder feedback that Jan had briefly reviewed, that was reviewed last time, is really just wishing that the students said, I wish they just would have talked to us about what was out there and what we could do, what our careers could be. Not that they had to make a definitive answer, but then align that to what's available at their high school. All of this is the intention of the IOP. But it just has such a nasty name because of the way it's been interpreted, and quite honestly, the way it was implemented early on was never the way it was intended. But really to have those conversations early and often. But I will tell you, the parents have said the same thing. Even in our early post-secondary opportunities, they said, I wish somebody would have talked to us to know what to expect and what to ask about and what to ask for. And so really that orientation doesn't just stick with the students, but also families, which is an emerging theme. As you all know, as Jan reviewed, really that family engagement for the support and awareness of what is available and how to help make that transition and a strong start in high school. Also, I thought this was super interesting. Since we do this at the university level, I haven't seen much of this occur in the high school level or the middle to high school, but summer bridge programs for rising ninth graders, particularly those who are at risk of struggling in ninth grade. And so that could be to help students build academic, social, and essential skills they will need to succeed in high school. This would come with either instruction, social emotional development, getting just a feel for being on campus, having some trusted adults that they've built relationships with. And you can see 90% of participants left ninth grade on track and took 3 AP classes their junior year on average compared to 1 for non-participants. And you can see the example in the summer bridge program. It's a week long. Lots of our districts have been doing interventions and using the COVID dollars really to help students, maintain and fill in some of the loss that they experienced, or maybe just some challenges that they have academically. But we know this is just as important for students who are transitioning to the high school. I really like this idea. We do this for colleges all the time to acclimate them to the campus and what they're aware of their resources. I think it's just as imperative as they move into another school in ninth grade. Okay, Jan. And then there are also a few organizational structures schools can put into place to support ninth grade success. These are, again, not overly new. And as Brianna had noted, this strategy was mentioned as stakeholder. I know several years ago, it was a big fad to do a ninth grade academy, put all your ninth graders in one wing. Some people did this and have still maintained it. Some were like, this is too much work and too many kids in one hallway. Logistics doesn't work, all the different things. But what the ninth grade academies is an academy in a school within a school with its own dedicated teachers, counselors, administrators, and services. Excuse me, and utilize a teacher team with a small group and a small group of students. There's common planning to address student issues and strategies. And then one study found that students who enrolled in academics academies scored higher on exams, had less disparities really had a much more of a positive experience. And so then even if a school does not implement a full academy, grade 9 teacher teams are recommended for strategy, a lot of times with those common plannings to address the needs of students and keep it moving. And then the next piece, again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this for you, but, and this is, if you came from a secondary background, you're like, well, duh, we do this. I wonder how many teachers who have been through all these calendar changes have ever questioned why we do this around schedule. A lot of times we can get caught in the minutia of 45-minute periods versus 90-minute. My only issue with this is there's lots of positive pieces around the 4x4 or not, meaning 45-minute courses per day versus a 90-minute for 4 courses, saying that the research says that with less courses, students can excel and do better. My only caution to that is what you do with that 90 minutes. It's not how many minutes you have, but what happens in those minutes you're given. And so it's very easy to say more is better. But if it is not sound instruction that is engaging and really advances the student and gives them an opportunity, I would say be cautious of this recommendation or these strategies. You have to have all the pieces in this. And where I've seen it fall apart is when you have teachers who still teach 45 minutes and then the 45 remaining minutes, they have a study hall or whatever. And that's really losing half of the course basically. So, but that is restructuring of time that could work. There is research around it, but I would say your humans matter of what goes on in that classroom. We'll go to the next one. And then 9th grade support during the day. Again, I think if we listed all the things that people like to get rid of that feel like the biggest waste of time, a lot of times you'll see advisory because advisory is not often used well, or it's given to teachers and they're told to do stuff with the kids, but not always strategic and intentional. Or it gets pulled or it's inconsistent. But basically to use those advisory periods to engage 9th graders, discuss topics, give them a go-to person. And you can see on the right side what it could be. Builds time into their schedule to help them develop study skills and discuss academic performance. But all of us know if it is not authentic and relevant, it is a waste of their time to them. It's just one more thing they have to do when it really could be an opportunity. Others offer 9th grade success course, kind of like that first year experience in college, only it's a 9th grade success as they get into high school. So it's very similar to successful transition and incorporating college and career preparation. So just other ideas of connecting students without doing the full academy or other things, but being intentional. And Jan, if you go, perfect. And then the next one, this is really interesting. A lot of people talk about this, near peer mentoring. Another successful strategy to support 9th graders. You can see the 2 examples on here where they provide 11th and 12th grade mentors to help with freshmen, or they'll give them small groups. And you can see that there was a drop in courses failed. They had connection with folks and they had a guide, a near peer guide that would help them. So there is great outcomes, but it really takes the coordination and having the right students to be able to mentor those freshmen into that first year. Okay. And then we just talk about family engagement, including families in the transition process to ease anxiety about this and reinforce good decisions on the part of the students. And you can see through education partnerships, they give lots of ways to engage students in the transition, on the transition team, connect middle school parents with current high school parents. I know that one of the staff that works here at CPE, she is the president of the PTSA at her middle school. And she is inviting Kia to come talk to 7th and 8th grade parents to start talking about financial assistance in post-secondary. And she's also inviting the high school counselors to come now. And it's only August. So August and September to start helping parents realize what's available in high school. Obviously, high school looks so different than what it did when I went. The opportunities are robust and really confusing acronyms. And so it's just a really good way to prepare the families and help them to become advocates for their own children about the opportunities that are there. Lots of great ideas. All right, state strategies, and we'll wrap this up. I know there's a lot of information, but ESG heard you last time. I want to make sure that you have some examples to react to and think about. So you can see that what we need to do is, and I don't mean to wordsmith, but to capture ideas today on really defining what we would like to see Kentucky is on track. When we say our freshmen on track for success, what does that mean? So there are 4 examples. I'm not telling you that they are perfect examples, but they are 4 state examples who have defined ninth grade on track. Most states consider credits and grades in their definitions. Maryland does not have a definition, but requires districts to track ninth grade indicators, including credit accumulation and core course failures. So core course meaning English, reading, mathematics, social studies, and science. So some states have taken this step further by publicly reporting ninth grade on track on incorporating it into their accountability systems. When ESSA went into play, this was a conversation we had in Kentucky when Dr. Pruitt was around of the non-academic indicators. There were lots of things discussed during that time, but you can see some states have incorporated that into their systems. There are dashboards. Dee Dee, I think about this, what you were talking about with the local dashboard. Ninth grade on track dashboards are another way the state can help shed light on the importance of being on track. Again, why it's important for us to know what we mean by on track, identify equity gaps, and provide districts with an understanding of how their on track rates compare to other districts. Oregon, this is what the example you see here, create a dashboard focused on ninth grade on track. Alternatively, a state could include an on track as one of the metrics of an early childhood to workforce dashboard, which I thought was an interesting piece. A lot of times when early childhood starts with each of their transitional points into workforce, which is kind of interesting. So the next piece, and I'm kind of going fast because I feel like I'm going to lose you if not, because there's so much information overload. And again, I apologize. We're about finished. Toolkits. So states have developed web pages and toolkits dedicated to helping districts learn about on-track strategies, letting them select what they want. The Washington ninth grade on-track system, I believe that is in your resource folder, is robust. It is very detailed, and it's a good example. But there's a lot of information there. It would really take, in my opinion, some professional learning and bite-sized pieces for this, because it is very comprehensive, but states have provided resources for their districts. And then the last one is on networks. And so states can help districts network with one another to share challenges, learn best practices, and understand their data. Washington connects with districts who are working to improve on-track rates. We do lots of communities of practice. I think there's lots of opportunities for professional growth, conversation, idea swapping, strategies really to address this. And there are also organizations that host these networks or provide conference opportunities for districts interested in ninth grade on track. And again, we'll share this with you, but you can see that there are lots of networks that really focus on this, because it is an indicator, predictive indicator that I really feel like underutilized sometimes before it's too late. And so we definitely need to see these young scholars really get the attention and support that they need. Okay, now I've done everything I said I would never do, which is throw more than 7 chunks at you in a setting, which is why Dan has a great idea of giving you an opportunity to catch some notes, something that sticks out to you and really that resonates. And so we're going to ask some questions, but I think what we're going to do with that, and Jan, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we're going to pose some reflection questions really in discussion. And what we will do is put up another form, because some of you feel comfortable talking out loud and some just feel comfortable filling in a document and just listening and giving your input in writing. We want to honor both of those styles. And so in the chat, I'm going to put the document in to make sure that was the one you needed. I'm pretty sure it is. It should have been your participant. Did I put the wrong one in, or did I put the right one in, Jan? Oh, you're muted.
Let me stop sharing so I can see the chat. Some people are already in the document, so I feel like it must be the right one.
So I had the note catcher, and then
the discussion document, I think is.
Then I may have put the wrong one. I did.
No, you did. No, you didn't. Yeah.
Okay.
You did the
All
wrong
right.
one, I think.
I think there's 2 in the
I don't
chat.
think it is.
There's 2 in the chat. I'm gonna send it again, because I think I sent you the wrong one, guys. I apologize.
Yeah.
Let me send you this one.
It should just say evidence-based practices note catcher it will have the three reflection questions
questions.
on it. Yeah. And
My
we'll,
apologies.
yeah, no problem.
So Jan, do you want to start off or would you like me to do that?
Yeah, I think really if we just kind of reflect back on those indicators that we heard about through those best practices, and just be interested in kind of hearing what really resonated with you. And as we're thinking about what we might want to elevate to recommendations for the CEC, what were some of the things that yeah, just really resonated with you? I'll just open that up. I can kind of put some things in the note catcher. Feel free to unmute, put in the chat, drop it in the document itself.
Well, I'd be happy to just comment that I appreciated the sensitivity that Amanda demonstrated throughout about how to think about this work without making it pejorative against individual or groups of kids. I think that's really important in the conversation. So sensitivity to ensure that our model is not in fact a deficit model. Like, I think it's a little bit of a stretch to, in a couple of places, to think that it's not deficit. But I think as long as we're always keenly attentive to eschewing a deficit model, I think it's really important. This is a silly comment, but it kept coming up to me. I, as a Weight Watcher, as their tracking system changed over time, way too much information, I know. That it changed from just subtracting points for what you ate to you subtracted some points if your GPA dropped a little bit, but you can gain some points if your attendance in the spring semester improves, or if you take a more advanced class, or if you join an extracurricular activity, which, by the way, I think as a notion we should capture in the research. But how can we present this model when it eventually goes to kids and families in such a way that we're always providing hope, that there is always a way out that will lead to successful completion?
I really appreciate your comment, Lou, about the even extracurricular and getting involved, because what has being in the early post-secondary opportunities, or excuse me, being in the first year post-secondary success, meeting yesterday, one of the key themes that's the greatest challenge is belonging. And part of that influencing the academic performance of the student of feeling like they belong on that campus. And I think sometimes we overlook that, and that might have been copied or captured in the social and mental health theme that was in the theme that was elevated here and with ninth grade on track. But I really like your comments about the indicators of you may be down here, but this gives you a leg up, because you're right. I don't want it to be, I shouldn't say personally, I don't want it to be, oh, well, Johnny Smith, man, he's kind of up the creek. It's never going to happen because he has terrible attendance, terrible grades. Good luck, right? But it's really, how can we engage the student and really give them an opportunity to do something, not as a write-off, but as we've got to get strategic about this. And I appreciate that. And Nick Brooks, I do want to read that since he does not have a mic, so he doesn't have a voice today, literally. It says, agree, Dr. Young, it would be easy to send a message that if you're not on track after freshman year, it's time to throw in the towel. Absolutely. That's the time when you dig in. So thank you, Nick, for sharing that.
Mm-hmm. I want to kind of feed off that too, because one of the things that it reminded me of, and when we work with Dr. Terry Scott out of the University of Louisville and his model for MTSS and really anything that we're doing that focuses on this, Dr. Young, is he talks about what can we work on that will promote success, because we know that successes build upon successes, and he uses that snowball analogy. So just as we know that failure sometimes can promote failure, we really want to focus at our lens on the things that promote success. And so what promotes on track for all students, and then I think that gives us more of that success focus that provides that hope that you were talking about. So I really think that should stay in the forefront of all of our recommendations as well. So appreciate that. I would be interested in just kind of your all's thoughts. I know in our discussion a little bit in July, we had some comments around grade point average. And so when we looked at the research around grade point average as a predictor and kind of what were your thoughts around kind of what we heard about that? Because it kind of is a flip than sometimes I think what we typically think of as using it. Sometimes there's a little bit of resistance there. So what did you all think about that as an indicator?
For me, what stood out to me is the combination of grade point with attendance. And it made me think about also that there may be other aspects of the data that we need to consider in non-binary, like just how do these pieces of data kind of interact with each other, instead of just looking at everything as a singular data point. Because I think that just like what Lou is saying, like when you bring in this other thing, how does that then change the data? How do these groups interact with each other? Because they really brought that up, that those two things together are more powerful than they are individually. So I do worry about, and I may be jumping ahead, but like if we think about some kind of an accountability system, I worry about the pressure on teachers to inflate grades even more than they already have that pressure if it were also added to an accountability system, because it would be tracking on track. So, you know what I mean? Like there's just one more piece of that. So I have, I heard a lot about GPA and in my focus groups with people and the pressure, or like how it's really difficult to grade students and the students are obsessed with their GPA and not necessarily their learning, and just trying to change that model. And so anyways, that's what stood out to me about GPA there.
Mm-hmm. That's a real challenge, I think, to, like you say, not have it be that over focus on that number versus the learning that we want to have happen.
And I will share Nick's comment too. It says relying heavily on GPA goes against the grain for me. Sorry, I jumped. So I'm trying to listen deeply to what the research says. My heartburn comes from what we know about the variability that happens in grading, and that grades are often conflated with things like, quote, teacher pleasing behaviors and other inflationary factors. So I'm definitely agreeing with Suzanne. I also worry that an over-reliance on GPA may cause an unintended consequence as students and their families may opt for less rigorous coursework.
Mm-hmm.
Unintended consequences are important to talk about for sure.
Mm-hmm. Definitely some challenges there.
I talk about attendance a lot with my families. For those of you that don't know me, I do preschool through first grade. And we give all of our families like a class of whatever t-shirt when their kids are starting kindergarten. Right now we're in class of 2035. So they, and we talk to them about attendance and why they're going to get phone calls from us about how we can help get their kid to school on time if they're not. And what the research says about attendance. But I think that I think more of that at the very early end, like, because what my elementary school tells me, my intermediate, is that they've already learned they have to be at school, because if they're not, I'm going to drive them crazy. So like that, I think some of that attendance stuff needs to happen really early on. And I don't know, but I see like this whole idea of hope being really important once they hit the older grades, because it's different for me to have that conversation with parents and how we're laying the groundwork. But if you're having those conversations with parents later about that, it could feel really overwhelming about it's too late. How am I going to ever fix this?
And then Nick also put in the chat some from his focus groups with principals, some discussion around credits earned. And there's some other states that used, the have you earned credits in a percentage of your classes and the first time around as indicators. And then using that in addition with other data like attendance, because of that interconnectivity of all those indicators.
Any other thoughts on the indicators for against concern or the combined efforts? I really am encouraged, honestly, just to hear your since I missed last conversation in real time. I am really encouraged by addressing the indicators piece in a hopeful manner and giving some pieces that could be personalized, I think, and then things that could be common, where we talk about attendance, we talk about credits earned, but then having those other indicators, it's okay to have additional indicators, I think, that are specific to the student, because to me, that is the intervention, right? So if you set goals for them to be involved, or if you, or you see improved, not just behavior, sometimes behavior doesn't mean that it's out of control and negative. It could be a very introverted behavior where they're not self-advocating, right? It could be lots of things that you set goals for being on track. But is there anything else that sticks out to you? And we can kind of massage these out for next time for you guys to give, like, yeah, we feel really comfortable with the way you worded this, or nope, you're way off. So this is helping us to figure out how to narrow that down and give you something to react to. Anything else on indicators?
I don't know if it's really on indicators. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to check on somebody. I just wanted to mention that, for Kentucky with the early warning system, it's just not one grad score. There's like a score for attendance, a score for different things. So as we provide that information to Kentucky Stats to look at, we're going to have an opportunity that not many folks have to really look and see what is a good predictor, what does influence it. Not look at it based on what Chicago's, there, because what we find in Kentucky is the same indicators aren't relevant, or as relevant, I should say, from one district to the other, much else from one state to the other. So I think it'll be interesting to see if the combined indicator is more relevant or more predictive, or if it's a one or the other of the indicators, being grades or attendance or something like that.
Dee, I was trying to kind of capture that in our notes. I just kind of captured it as using the early warning system grad score is those indicators of attendance, course failures, stability, which I think is one that doesn't often come up, and attendance, stability, behavior, and course failures. It kind of combines those.
It combines them, but they also calculate an individual score for each of the individual elements.
Okay.
So Dee, I'm going to follow up on something you were talking about earlier when we were talking about measuring post-secondary success. So if we want to go all the way out to, say, 6 years post-graduation, we could probably do the class of 2013. If we only want to go 5 years out, we could do the class of 2014. And I believe that's when you're starting to give us those early warning numbers.
That's correct.
So for perspective, that's what we have.
Right. So we would start with the class of 13, 14 is what we would have to start with. And again, I think the data becomes better and richer as it's had time the model has had time to work and incorporate what's really being more predictive than others. So I think that is something that we're going to have. So I'll put in the kind of in the chat so that you'll have a complete list of what's available. How about that?
Okay. And I did just put a little bit in the state strategies just as a reminder that the state data around early warning system, you're moving toward capturing some of that historical data for us to provide that richer picture of prediction.
And I think this conversation always also reminds me to Suzanne's comments as well as Dee Dee's, that we need to spend a lot of time in the larger continuum having conversations about audiences. So right now I feel like we're really having a P12 educator and leader conversation, but if we don't have commensurate conversations with families, as Suzanne was describing, then I think we could set them up for further failure by saying, well, I didn't know, or I might have known, but I didn't know what to do. So I still think we've got to lean into the collaboration that the continuum was founded on to think about how this message transcends the professional audience. And personally, I would say by the time they're 6th, 7th, and 8th grader, gets all the way to the individual learner. and what kind of tools she might need to not throw in the towel and to change her trajectory when we see her heading down the wrong path.
Absolutely. And you kind of, I'm going to just give a caveat on that. Lou, that's exactly what we're going to talk about in the continuum is we're going to share some of these points, give the stakeholder feedback and talk with the continuum from all their perspectives, from their multiple roles of like, who else are we missing on this? Because what's so interesting when I step back and just read the notes about attendance and performance, what do we hear the workforce talk about every day, all day? You know, workforce and industry folks, right? Business and industry, like we just need people to show up and we need
Drug-free.
drug-free, besides drug-free, but like engage, we need that, right? And even when I think about Suzanne talking about early childhood, it's working just as much with the families on that development, with developing that family and their role as parents and how pivotal it is with those youngest kiddos, right? And what do we want from them? We want them to show up. We want them to be present. We want them to succeed. We want them to, whatever the task is, that they accomplish it, right? And they get what they need to do so. So there's some real universal language, I feel like, that's not just siloed for ninth grade on track. Like it's really some skills that we want to see those develop, I feel like, as we go through the transition, because we would say the same thing over transitioning into post-secondary or to workforce, or if you're transitioning to military, you better be on time, you know? And so there's, I think to your point, Lou, I really appreciate that, of really being intentional with our audiences and what is the message and what's the overall, who cares, right? So it's not just them about earning grades and being on the honor roll, but it's like, what's the greater good of this? And how does that trajectory set them up for the next, each phase in their life? And I really appreciate that, because that's going to be part of our conversation is what are we missing? And what message are we missing if we're being too much in the weeds without seeing the bigger picture? So I do appreciate you pushing on that. I think that's an excellent point. And I'll be anxious to hear from our students, to hear what they have to say about that as well.
And I did jot that down in our third indicator, that need for that expanded collaboration, being aware of whose voices are missing. And we did talk a little bit about that in our discussion in July, when we even looked at the stakeholders, even though we were pleased to see the variety that we had and the number that responded, we felt like we were still missing a significant number of other voices. And so I think being aware of how we might want to expand that forward, it will be a huge piece of the work.
I'd love to hear more about your all's thoughts on state strategies, any of those district strategies that were brought up that we could elevate or remind people of, that you feel like would be really important, or any of the state strategies folks use that really stuck out to you, that's something that we could build a recommendation around, find support around, or spend a little more time on. Anything that stuck out to you? Or any ideas you hated that you were like, please don't make us do that, or even think about writing that down? Any of those? I think the one that I would like to see avoided, that I kind of heard from you all as well, is not in the accountability system.
Yeah.
And that's absolute. Hey, Jane Nora, so good to see you. That I think that's definite. I think that's a definite something that is not of interest. We don't need more of that, right? So it's not to force people into giving grades and giving things that are needed, but just good practice at the school and district level, and things that we can support as a state. Anything else stick out to you, or of good practice you'd really like to see us elevate, or something to further discuss and make people aware of?
I think some of it is making sure people are aware of things that are already available. I mean, I think we could do all a better job, I'm speaking for myself as anyone, trying to promote some of these stuff and trying to get it to the right people. You know, we each have our kind of our silos of who we talk to, and we try to get beyond that group, but we're very reliant on local communication. So, you know, trying to, you know, do a better job there. I think, you know, we've got a lot of information on chronic absenteeism. Our, you know, chronic absenteeism is almost 20% across the state. And, you know, we're talking about, you know, looking at chronic absenteeism. If you're not in the classroom, you're not learning. So, you know, and the same thing with the, you know, we talk about the early warning system, but, you know, we're the first to admit schools don't all take advantage of it. Just because it's free doesn't mean they're going to use it. They have to see the value in it. And I think what we can do is help not just tell them about it, but use some of the research to show the value in looking at the data and the things that can be done, what can be done with it towards intervention. I mean, Infinite Campus has a huge intervention module in it to really kind of allow people to do certain things and really track that. We don't use that at all in the state. So, I mean, there's tools available to us that could help us. There's engagement, you know, there's Thriving Index survey that can be thrown, you know, that are free to everybody to use, but it's not something that we're really promoting use of. And there's just a lot going on. I mean, it's not like somebody sitting out there waiting for us to tell them what next to try. It's like you've got to be strategic about what can make a difference and how to go about in promoting it.
I'm wondering if that kind of goes back to maybe just a little bit of thinking about those assets that we already have, and some of the things that we have. If we're looking at state strategies, you know, what kind of state tools and best practices and things are already available. How might we elevate them? How might we even reconfigure them somewhat? I often hear from the field that there's a lot of good guidance, but finding it sometimes is a challenge. So there's, like you said, there's so many things going on in so many different divisions, it's not easily accessible. And then sometimes our guidance becomes too much to dig through. So, you know, what might be alternate formats or ways that we can already maybe just map what we already have, what we want to elevate, and then maybe some recommendations around how better to distribute that and get that information out there. I'm just wondering if that might be something that would be helpful.
I know a lot of districts are really working and have focused, I've read a ton on all the different ways that they're trying to re-engage students and get them caught up, and you know, which is going to be ongoing. I just wonder how we build this in, kind of to your point, Jan, around not being one more thing, but kind of the new piece that they put in place, a new process or a reintroduction to maybe the process they had used before, when it's really pivotal. Especially, Dee Dee, when I hear you say that there's 20% chronic truancy, that's large. It's a large number.
And that's statewide, so you know there's a lot of districts that are worse off than that.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. If that's your average, I think that's pretty high. So I don't know, Janora, I'm not trying to throw you under the bus, but you came out of the district level, and we were just talking about strategies of we talked about the early warning system and just strategies that districts and the state can help promote, you know, early and often intervention and guidance, and how pivotal it is from 8th grade to 9th grade. So I know you're at the elementary now, but before you were at the district level. So I didn't know if you guys had any strategies that you all used or thought were helpful, or maybe have big challenges you all were addressing.
I will tell you that one of the big things in our middle and high school is our social workers, and they work alongside our DPP. And so they kind of work collectively together to kind of reach out. And I'm sorry, someone's having a thinking time. They work together to reach out to families, especially with truancy, to try to get them there. And then in my previous role with the district opportunity outreach, I was another line of defense to call and try to connect with some of those families. Because sometimes I'll tell you, it's a cultural thing and how you go about connecting with them. So I was kind of my connections were not always like, I was kind of out of the box. So it might be that I saw you at Piggly Wiggly and I was like, hey, I haven't seen so-and-so at school, like talk to me. And we just carry on a conversation. That's how I would pick up data about this student. So I think social workers are key in that DPP. And then I'll tell you something else with us here in Simpson County are the judge, the family court judge, and he's actually not seeking reelection. So, but he comes to the high school every Wednesday and he meets with those kids who have been having truancy issues. And so he himself sits down with them and he speaks with them. So that connection from the judicial system to the school, like that's been key in trying to help with our truancy issues. So I really just think it's about making connections and having the key people in place to help make those connections. And like I said, that relationship that we have with the judicial system, with our judge, like our family court judge comes to school and meets with those kids to try to check in on them. I think that has been helpful in deterring kids from missing, because here the judge is talking to you and the judge is telling you what's going to happen if you don't come to school. So that's just some of the things that we've done here in Simpson County.
I think it's really important where you mentioned culture, because not all strategies to connect is going to look the same or work the same. I do appreciate you saying that. It's really interesting reaction. So I won't keep talking. I apologize. Whoop. Thanks for sharing, January.
Trying to think how to capture that. I'm just going to capture that under asset mapping, I think, Janora, because I think if we can help districts think about who and what they have in place, and maybe go ahead and use those assets from community partners, where there's those judge executives or maybe community mental health supports or other partners that can come in and help provide support, but as well as the school-based supports that we may have in place, recognize who we have, whether it's social workers, utilizing those friskies, knowing what you have and who you have that could be the support to put in place. So that may be a strategy we could kind of help schools, or a way we could support our districts. And again, feel free to go in there and clean it up or put your own spin on something. I'm trying to capture this in the best places possible.
And if there's anything else, just to keep going for our third question is, how can state agencies support districts in implementing the district strategies discussed? So I know Dee Dee has talked a lot about the early warning system and even getting feedback to build out a system and enhance it. That's really going to be helpful, which was super informative, Dee Dee. I appreciate you sharing that. Is there any other agencies or groups that can support this? This work of things we could put in recommendations of connections or collaboration. I think all that's super important. And I'm thinking about Lou's push on the audiences. So who is the trusted messenger for those audiences? That can sometimes be a challenge to figure out, if I say it to somebody, a group that has no idea who I am, nor do they care, and they've never heard of CPE, who cares? They wouldn't really take that in as valuable information. And so I think that's the value of our continuing representing 20 different role groups. But where do you see additional collaboration or intentional connection?
I think Kia provides a lot of resources in there. I don't know if everybody knows who Kia is, but they sure get a lot of messaging from them as for the high school process. And so I think they get that. We go back and forth on that because I think sometimes if we could get districts to send out messages or meaningful messages, it would be more powerful because that's a trusted source. They're used to getting messages, and we've got tools like text messaging, emails that can go out through Infinite Campus, notifications that can go out to the parent portal if they're using that. that, we can do that, but we really have no authority. We tried, Amanda, last year, we tried to get them to send out a message about more college going and promotion and all that. And, we didn't get a lot of districts just because KDE thought it was a good idea to do the work. And, there's been a lot going on. So I want to qualify anything over the last couple of years. Everybody's had their hands run, full. I mean, so it may have been, they thought it was a great idea if it was just the timing that was bad. So I don't mean to be negative on anything, but I think that, schools and districts are a trusted source of information. They're used to getting things. If I'm going to open a piece of mail, it's probably going to be something from my child's school or district that I know there's that connection with. But I think we can really, in communities, we talked a little bit, really engage with the workforce investment boards and the employers and try to bring that perspective maybe through, and I know a lot of high schools are already doing this, but trying to get that communication, and maybe high school is too late. Maybe it needs to be, in middle school to really get students excited. In Kentucky, we don't have a really large mobility rate. A lot of people stay close to home, knowing what they need to, what kind of education they need, what kind of what kind of skill sets they need to be able to take it to, different type of employers might be very helpful. And that may be all, it's been a long time since I had kids in high school now, so it may be all being done. I think the CTE programs help with that a lot.
I also think any collaboration with like area colleges or universities programming they have. I know like in my area where I'm at, we collaborate with Western a lot. And like in particular, Western has a program called Young Male Leadership Academy that is a pipeline for to get young males of color interested in education. So like our district started collaborating with them last year. Well, we kind of also use that as a vehicle to talk about the importance of being a leader, coming to school, being on time, because they have to come to meetings, so they have to be on time. And so just reinforcing that idea of attendance and showing up. So like whether it's KCTCS organizations or, if I feel like most districts are close to some type of college or university in some way, not everybody, but some. So if they have programming that can kind of reinforce the importance of coming to school and being prepared and being there, I mean, that could be an idea to throw out to schools and districts. How can you collaborate with post-secondary education institutions in your area? I mean, I don't know. It's just throwing that out.
Oh, I think it's a really good point. How early, Janora, do you all engage the students who participate in the Young Male Leadership Program?
That starts ninth grade.
Okay.
They start that with ninth grade, recruiting those young men to be a part. But also too, I know a lot of schools in this area have leadership programs at the elementary and middle school levels as well to kind of help with that. They're not necessarily connected to a college or university, but they have these programs. So I think any type of community type programming, boys and girls clubs, and I don't know, yes, I've traveled this state. It's been a few years, but I've traveled all around the state, but I do know that some areas have a lot of community type programming and some don't. So maybe the conversation is, how can we help build that community type programming in those areas?
I really like that. Really like that.
I like that, especially because it goes back again to some of that research we just looked at that said, those mentors, those mentoring opportunities. And so seeing other people like you who have, are doing this or are involved in this, or who have moved on from high school to achieve whatever, I think that just makes those connections, peer connections, that are so valuable.
Is there anything else we've missed? We had 3 main questions, so it wasn't a ton, but it's given us a lot of guidance for sure. Jan, if it's okay with you, I'm gonna move on with what's gonna happen at the continuum. So you all probably received an invitation to the reception on September 20th. If you have not, double check your spam. And if you haven't, now make sure you get it. Because I know Joette's been sending literally tons of emails to invite you. What we are doing is hosting a couple hours of an evening for the continuum members, the work group members, and some legislators, because we want to see policy change. We want to see money roll in with some of these, and we want for folks to see that when you collaborate with a group of people from all different parts of the state and you listen to people from Kentucky, that great things can happen. We're just going to do that to kind of celebrate the work so far and make people aware of what the work is and what we do. We're still figuring it out, if we're going to be really honest, but it's working, and we're grateful for the participation. And then on the 21st, the continuum members are actually going to come together and discuss these things. And so what we will be sharing from ninth grade on track work group is that we're basically just going to give an overview of who the members are, where you guys are all from, and what you're doing. And then we're also, we'll share what we've done so far. So just the stakeholder feedback we've collected, what we learned from that. And then we will summarize kind of the conversations around indicators of what we talked about today, the unintended consequences of what we don't want and what we're interested in, just the credits, the discussion, but yet caution around GPA, the importance of attendance, involvement, and even just the mentoring pieces. Like, I've heard so many great ideas that are comprehensive but can be personalized to your district, which I think is essential. Because we don't all look the same, we don't all function the same, we don't have all the same resources. So it's really important we don't have a one size fits all. But I do think we can have some pillars of a framework for people to work within. So we're talking about the same thing. And then we have the free resource online on Infinite Campus that we don't even have to purchase or ask people to spend money on. So there's some assets we have in the state that folks just may not know or just simply forgot about. There's been a lot on the plates of educators for the last few years. And so to expect you to know all the things all the time would be unrealistic. So we're going to talk about that. We'll talk about emerging recommendations or priorities. And what we'll do is Jane and I will just summarize what we talked about today of just things that stood out where you would like to see more work. This is still a work in progress. So Jane and I can flesh this out and put it in better writing, send it to you all to make sure there isn't something completely off the wall. For you guys to say, yeah, this is what we're talking about and where we are. And then we're going to ask the continuum to respond to that. Like, is there something else we haven't thought about they'd like us to think more about, or other data points, or other approaches, or further information about something? And then I'll be able to bring that back to you in October. So we are moving. I know it probably feels weird to you of what's going on. And the beauty of this group is that it's not mandated. And it's not regulatory, it is collaborative. And so the recommendations really drive a lot of work within the agencies and people coming together intentionally, because it was developed by stakeholders and driven by stakeholder feedback. And y'all, that's the right thing to do. That's the only way we're going to get stuff done and still honor all the differences across our state. So that's where we're going. And you will see that probably within the next week or so. Just give us some time to pull it together. Our next meeting will be October
18th, I think.
Thank you, October 18th. And so what we will do is we will have everything cleaned up from today, the language cleaned up from today, and then start to narrow down either a statement or a few bullets of indicators of what we mean when we're talking about ninth grade on track. And it doesn't have to be a perfect black and white definition, but it can give indicators of what we're talking about, of what that may mean, and then some recommendations. We can start formulating those recommendations, or whatever you shared with us today. If we have some recommendations you feel comfortable with, what we like to do is also formulate some suggested actions. Like, what does that look like? Because sometimes when you make these recommendations, they feel good, but people are like, okay, so what does that mean? And so like, even like Jane and Nora, I was thinking about your example today with using community partners, right? Like, It could be, how do we elevate that? So it could be KDE in partnership with the co-ops will elevate strategies for whatever. Or we will identify assets in the state and elevate bright spots and communicate those. Or we'll work with the Pritchard Parent Group, right, to help improve information and support of parents as they prepare for high school transition for their child. You know, whatever that may be, you guys will get to help drive that, and we'll start to formulate that. It may be only 2-3 recommendations with suggested actions under, which is okay because that helps consolidate and then drive home what's needed. If you see the need for funding or policy changes that you would love to see, we can put that in a recommendation. So that's where we're going. I hope you see it. I hope you know that we are moving. And this is not a super easy topic because it's kind of mushy. And we honestly don't talk enough about it. So, but I am encouraged by the conversation today because I see the broader goal and the true continuum from really pre-K all the way through workforce with these expectations and development of skills and expectations and achievement. And we got to see that big picture, and we got to help other folks see the big picture of why it matters. So I really appreciate you today. I will tell you, and I'll let Jan say something here, but this is Jan's last meeting. She is retiring on us, and I am highly jealous because she is an excellent partner in crime, and I love her brain and her thinking about stuff and just her thoughtfulness about this topic. And so, but we will continue. I will be your co-lead, and Destiny is also transitioning a little bit. And so I'm going to be your constant to get these recommendations through and how we engage in this work. But Jan, I will let you finish us out today and say some words. And I'm just really sad, you guys, because she's super cool and has a great brain. So I will not probably leave her alone for her ideas, but I will certainly celebrate her retirement. So.
Oh, thank you, Amanda. That is one of the bittersweet things about thinking about retirement. I am really looking forward to having some time, but there's so many things that I've been part of that I just really don't want to let go of. And this is, you know, the work around this is just, I've really learned a lot from being part of the work group and the hearing from you guys and looking into some of the practices and the research that we've heard from our stakeholders. So again, kind of bittersweet feeling. Maybe after I have my gap, I can come back as a member just to continue to be part of the work. But definitely have appreciated the time and the effort that everyone has put on and the feedback that we've gotten. So thank you all so much.
All right. Is there any final comments that anyone else has? We are.
I'm sorry I was late. These little people, they got me hostage, y'all.
Janora, I have been in your shoes and in your seat. There is no reason to apologize. I'm just glad you could join us at all. And same with you, Suzanne. Like
My friend finally went to sleep, so I don't know if you're snoring.
he went to that boy was tired. Bless his heart.
Oh, it's been a rough day.
Just grateful for your time. And I'm telling you though, everything you're experiencing with the little ones are no different than the older ones. They're just taller and bigger.
They're
No
just
different.
little. You're right. I just feel like I'm still with the high schoolers because they're just little, but like
Don't let them fool you, girl. Don't let that cuteness fool you.
they have some big personalities. Let me tell you.
Yes, yes.
Mm.
I'm just glad you could join us. You're always, we get it.
Thank y'all for still including me. I like this work. I miss this is like what I like to do, but
Nope.
you know,
I get it completely.
who
We're
knows
just
why I'm being a principal.
You're building resilience, girl. That's what you're doing. And you're
That's what
starting
I'm
young. You see
Yeah.
where they have to go. So
Yeah.
no, I think it's great. Well, you guys have an awesome day and weekend. You'll hear from us. And I am going to push out the Kentucky Advising Academy is coming in your area soon to do some face-to-face work with post-secondary and high school counselors, FRISC, social workers, all that. So if you can help me get that out, that would be great. But other than that, you guys have a fantastic day and thank you for your input and wisdom. Have a good one.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.